That was an extremely fast countdown, and I see live now. So, welcome everyone to the Britive and Stratascale presentation on insider abuse and cyber attacks, specifically talking about taking a proactive approach to managing privileged GCP users. Um, as a quick side note, we are open to questions and answers, so feel free to throw those in. And also, we did have a raffle set up for a set of Apple AirPods. So, for anyone who stays through the presentation, at the end of the presentation, we're randomly going to pick a winner for those AirPods. So we'll shoot you an email and let you know. Without further delay, let me go ahead and get into this here. Just level setting with an agenda, right? Quick introductions about who we are, and then we'll get in the meat of what we're going to do, and we'll wrap it up with a demo. Joining us today from Stratascale is Rob Forbes. He's a director of identity services, Stratascale. Very knowledgeable and very friendly. Any questions, feel free to reach out, and he'll answer your questions. SHI and Stratascale is a great company to work with from my experience. I'll be doing most of the talking today, except for where Rob jumps in. I'm John Morton, Director of Solutions Engineering at Britive. You name it, I've probably done it in the vendor space as well as on the defender side, from endpoint to cloud. And today we're going to be talking about GCP. Alrighty. So, what are we talking about here? Google Cloud. First and foremost, I like to make the statement that not all cloud is created equal, right? Azure is radically different from AWS, is radically different from Google. And when we talk about Google Cloud, it's a very powerful tool. GCP has done a lot of things right. No one's here to lambast them and say they're doing everything wrong. It's the approach to managing access that we find a lot of unique things that are happening, not with just humans, but also with non-humans or service accounts. We're going to dive into that a little bit because anytime you have something that's not well understood except by a handful of people, there's an opportunity to exploit that. Unfortunately, we live in a world of attackers who capitalize on that sort of lack of knowledge. One of the things that we do tend to see is, standing privileges for admins, app developers. I'm going to dig in specifically to a role called owner. It is probably the most powerful role you'll ever see in any cloud environment anywhere, right? So when these are statically assigned to statically assigned user accounts or service accounts, that's an opportunity for, 24/7 risk exposure. The other thing we tend to see is a real lack of visibility. Even if you do run reports within GCP about who has access, I don't think it's very well understood what that even means, right? I mentioned the word owner, but what if I changed the name of that role to something else and I gave it all the exact same permissions? Would anyone understand, right? That would be obfuscating that role generally. And then the last thing is, just overprivilege. The easiest way, let me make sure that my headset here is connected to my headset. Oh no, it's not. Here we go. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
I can hear you before, John.
I just want to make sure it's a little more refined on the audio too. So, as I was saying, the other thing is overly broad privilege, right? So just because you can give someone owner doesn't mean you should, even though it'll get the job done and it's very easy. Maybe that's not the best approach, right? Maybe there's a better way to streamline and right-size those roles. Anything to add on this, Rob? I know we're going to get into your section.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, when you talk about owner, the way I equate it for people is it's very similar to root in Unix, Linux. It's a very powerful account that was, built for a reason, but perhaps is not properly done or properly refined, and thus you need to start to be able to constrain those in and do it. And a lot of times you mentioned, people will obfuscate the owner role, or they'll just copy it. Hey, Joe's an admin too, so let me just copy that role. So there's risks with this account, and especially when I compare it, like I said, to root, because it's got that level of capability, that level of control inside the platform and inside the environment. You have to be very careful with it, just like you do root, and just like we had to come up with mitigating controls and other technical solutions around root, we need to do the same thing with accounts like owner inside these cloud platforms.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, Rob. So that's one of the things I'm going to highlight too as we kind of go through this is, well, why why do people do it? And my simple answer to most CTOs or CISOs is it's easy. They just want it to work. Right? It just needs to work.
Yeah, that's
All right.
it's you know, hey, just make it easy is a theme we'll all touch on.
That's exactly it, right? So one of the things I like to highlight too is, you know, in that theme, the sense of things, when I talk to a lot of folks in the security side of the house, not as much on the cloud side, I don't think they have a fundamental understanding of the differences of GCP. So I like to, you know, start with, hey, what are some key terms? How is it architected? What does it look like? And, you know, that's what we're showing here, right? And in GCP, there is a organizational structure. Normally it's called an organization. And within that, folks operate within folders, projects, and then that gives them access to the resources that they need. Fundamentally, these are just, you know, places where folks do work. You have different projects that run different tasks that leverage the resources like BigQuery and things like that within GCP. And the terms that you see within GCP don't necessarily align with traditional IAM terms or other cloud services terms. So you see there's user accounts and service accounts, and then environments include folders and projects, and then resources are resources. So I like to kind of just level set with architecture and terminology to make sure we're using the same language. User accounts, as a matter of fact, normally relate to humans. Service accounts relate to services, and not in the traditional sense of IAM too. I like to make this clear for a lot of folks that are listening. When folks are used to the on-premise world of Active Directory, they think of a service account as a placeholder. Maybe someone has the user account name and the password, and they vault it, and they rotate it, and they can log in. In GCP, we actually see service accounts leveraged differently. In some cases, there's not even a password. It's literally a function that can execute tasks like in BigQuery. So even there, service account, although it seems like it should make sense, in the new cloud world, especially in GCP, it's different, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not intuitive, John. I'll just say it. It's not that intuitive when it's just the reuse of terms that we're so used to inside the cloud environments really make us have to shift and adapt to what we're looking at and how we're approaching it.
Exactly, and that's what I highlighted here. I don't know if everyone noticed in the slide, but one of the most unique and outstanding things about GCP itself is by way you can get access to environments and resources. There's Google Cloud Identity Directory, which is an offering from Google itself. There's Google Apps. You can tell I need to update my slide. It's Google Workspaces. And there's also Gmail. So what that means is fundamentally, if you have a project and someone was able to manage the policy or was the owner, you can actually give multiple paths to those projects across the Google set of directories, where that concept of visibility is really lost on folks, especially when they get a glimpse into their world and they realize, well, what is all these strange accounts that have access to these projects? It's just based on how GCP is architected and works. You know?
Yeah, and that really opens up that attack surface, because you're trying to manage multiple things instead of one spot and going, hey, let's look at the identities that have access to this. No, I've got to look at 3 places that I'm giving identities. And I could forget I gave something access to something, and now I've got a backdoor path or path I forgot about.
Exactly. And the other thing too is, unfortunately, with the opportunity of folders and projects, you can now nest. I know if anybody's had Active Directory experience, nesting groups within groups, you can make hierarchical order. Policies can be superseded in the same way, in theory. I don't see that as much, but imagine just nesting folders and folders and projects, and you expect the top tier policy to keep all of Gmail out, but somehow you can break inheritance. So it's thinking about these things and just using that common language, I think, that can help us understand, okay, well, what are we looking at? A couple of use cases about that, right? So, we talk about just-in-time access, temporary access. That's something that I like to harp on a lot. And, I represent a company, Britive, and it's the claim to fame of what we do, but it's almost a novel idea. Why aren't more people talking about this? Why should accounts have static privileges to begin with, right? So one of the things, like use cases 1 we've mapped out, is that on-demand access to GCP. Why should a service account or a human user have owner all the time if they don't necessarily need it? And you can make all the justification in the world you want for needing it, but the answer is, I can give it to you when you want it, and I will take it away. Let's reduce that risk landscape. 24/7, right? To when you need it, as you need it. What do you think about that, Rob?
Yeah, no, that's after 30 plus years in IT security, it's always the fight with the developers, with the DBAs, with the system administrators. Well, I'm the administrator, I should have this access. Well, that's great. It's not a matter of we don't trust you. It's a matter of managing the risk and the attack surface around that risk. If that account's not there with that static access, it's much harder to compromise the environment. So it's really a matter of security, but it's so ingrained in folks as they come up and they're building their own Linux systems, their own apps that they own. It's mine. I've got the access, that they really don't get that big picture approach. So this is spot on.
Yeah, I'm telling you, Rob, they're ready to fight about it sometimes.
Oh, yes.
It's all calm down.
I've been involved in them from both sides.
Yeah, there's a new way. The cloud gives us new capabilities, right? So the use case 2 kind of highlights that too, right? Dynamically provided time limits around that access. Again, we give you what you want when you want it, and we'll give it to you for a set amount of time, because maybe you created a service account and you used it once and you completely forgot and it's just lost. And owners out there, right?
Yep. And you get the same thing here. Well, what if I'm in the middle? There's always an exception. What if I'm in the middle of doing a change, or what if I'm in the middle of doing something and my access goes away, or I have to re-authenticate? Now I've made it more difficult. So it's always easy to find reasons why not to do it. You want to focus on the reasons why you need to do it.
Exactly. No, that's a huge point, Rob. One thing I wanted to harp on too is I want to accelerate development in the cloud. If we think about why are people doing anything, businesses have an objective, and that objective normally is to appease stakeholders by generating revenue or protecting some outcomes. Why would we want to slow things down with security when we can enhance it? So that's exactly what we're saying. We'll give you what you want when you need it. We'll put some controls around it. And then to use case number 3, we're going to have that full auditability around who's doing what. Again, I like beating on service accounts. How do you know who's creating these service accounts? How do you know who's logging into them, right? When you have a centralized broker sort of access, like what we're doing, what we're building, now you can bind all activity back to at least someone, not through audit, not through, hey, tell me what you had for breakfast on Friday when it's already Monday morning, right? We're saying in real time, since we broker the access, we can bind people to human and machine activity and feed that to your SIMs, to your IGAs, to your ERPs, all those workflows that are human-centric around audit and capabilities, right? We now have that sort of visibility around it.
Yeah, and that really makes a big difference when you start getting into things like troubleshooting. People don't think about things like that. Is when I'm troubleshooting, hey, it was 2 a.m. and something changed something. Who did it? Who had that right to change that out? Now it's not, who was on call or was that? No, we can go back and we can audit that. We can track it and we can narrow it down, and we can eliminate things like downtime and troubleshooting issues when it comes to, things like root cause analysis. Let's go figure out what changed what, when, where. It's not, well, these 7 people had access to that service account, who logged into it. Let's go look at the IP stacks and traces for DHCP and all the things we used to have to do. Now these things start to go away. And so we're streamlining troubleshooting and other things that people just don't even think about.
That's funny. I brought that up this morning, not to name drop another company, but this is where you can make operations meet security. Someone had a Datadog incident, right, where GCP project went down. They go and look, and all they see is 8 service accounts, and they have no idea who did this. They know no idea of why, right? So when you can associate those 2 together based on access, huge win, right? And then the fourth is the ability to create and use ephemeral tokens. So this is another one of my favorites, right? A lot of very smart folks in the data science world, especially data scientists, they love to build those pretty reports for us. And what they normally do is they aggregate data across clouds. And they normally do this via a script, like a Python script or a Perl script or whatever language they prefer. The script has hard-coded credentials or hard-coded overprivileged tokens that goes and collects data from, GCP, OCI, Azure, AWS, and it brings it back to their Jupyter notebook, and they populate it. So our goal, our vision is, please stop hard coding credentials. Please stop hard coding overprivileged tokens. We can issue you a token that has, by definition, 0 standing privileges. The token can check out the access it needs to BigQuery, for example, run its query, collect the data, and then we're going to remove the access from the token. That's good news, because if the token ends up on paste bin, right? Oh, well, You got the token. Great. We can put controls around it, but by default, it has no permissions.
Yeah, and that's that's one of those things. These password, these token attacks, these replay attacks, those types of things. When you go with the ephemeral access, it eliminates that. So this shows up in an S3 bucket somewhere or a Google file that gets exposed. You're not worried about it. You just get rid of the token because it's got no access until something grants it the access. Great, you've got my token. It doesn't do a dang thing.
I'm still going to rotate it, but at least I know.
I'm going to rotate it, but I'm not going to have a cow about it.
Exactly. I'm not worried at that moment. So yeah, these use cases are common use cases we see, right, where you still want to have a holistic story, right? You don't want a niche solution that does just-in-time temporary access. You want to fit the use cases that, we know customers are normally in for. And just re-emphasizing those key concepts Rob and I touched on throughout this is, enforcing true least privilege is about balancing temporary access, that literal ephemeral access just in time, right? Where we're giving you just enough privileges, because we can learn over time as well of what you've actually done. But to me, I think getting to that zero standing privileges is just fundamental. I know it's radically new for a lot of folks, but with GCP in the cloud, we have these capabilities. So we'll highlight that.
Yeah, and John, the interesting thing here is the new hotness. There's always something hot, whether it's SASE or whether it's ephemeral tokens or what. But obviously, zero trust is garnering a lot of attention these days. This seems to play in very well into zero trust. You want to take a moment and kind of talk about how this touches in that?
I can touch on it now, and I think you have a big section coming up here. I'll dive in like you did for me, but exactly right. So zero standing privileges is just one component of a larger zero trust framework. I have a full mapped out, I borrowed it from the Department of Defense around zero trust explicitly, where you break down the components. And one of those components is authentication, and the other is authorization in a zero trust framework. So in the zero trust framework, when you talk about authentication, I'm not talking about humans and their passwords. I'm talking about tokens like we just beat up on. And then you pivot to that authorization standpoint. Are you authorized to access resources, services? So we can separate the two in that zero trust framework and really narrow in on both, specifically as it relates to GCP.
Yeah, so it's going to give people a very strong step and capability in that zero trust framework that they're going to need to be able to move to that, to get away from things like ransomware attacks and the other things that zero trust is designed to eliminate. So I think it's a critical part that's coming up.
Cool. So I think this is you, Rob, and I
Sure.
think you can actually hit slide progress.
I can. Yeah.
All right.
So, and thanks, John. It's John and I have had some great conversations on this topic and digging through it. And you can tell we're both kind of gregarious about it and kind of, very excited about the topic. So we enjoy talking about it. So it makes for a great presentation. I want to talk a little bit, coming at it from the GSI side, the integrator side. We see it a little bit different. We see some different things. So I just wanted to touch on a few different things when we talk about taking that proactive approach to managing users. When we start things initially, identity sprawl has always been a problem. The cloud's just driven that. I don't care if it's a GCP or if it's Azure, or if it's AWS, they all bring their own sets. They all have their own identity stores. They all have their own administrative accounts that they've got there. They all have roles that are out there. They all have service accounts or API accounts out there. Each one's got its own policy engine for managing this access. Each one of them has a new interface. I'm here and I'm working on Amazon. I go to another company and I've got GCP, or I've got both, or we add in AWS, or Azure, and I've got these different consoles that I'm trying to manage this, and it's just pushing that sprawl out. And even with things like federation and stuff, to smooth that transition, there's still, a lot of additional access that I've got to manage. Great, I've got one identity, but what about the access rights for that identity? What roles did I give it? What service accounts it's leveraging? So, cloud sprawl is just a thing, and GCP just adds to the layers that everybody else adds to as well. So you've got to worry about it and you've got to address it. Some of the dangers that we've got, the first one that I come to and John hit on too is we see this all the time, is the over provisioned accounts. these default roles, the owner roles, the service accounts that are leveraged out there, default groups, all users, all this, all that, those are out there. The default policies. Hey, here's the policy for this. And it kind of fits you. So this goes back to that easy button. These cloud providers, their goal is to make this transition to the cloud as easy as possible, because if organizations are finding it difficult or struggling to do it, they're going to push back on it. They're not going to do it. They're going to go back to the CTO or the CIO or CEO and go, hey, we've tried this and it's just not working. We got to do this and this and this and this, and we got to do all these things. And look at all the problems we had with that implementation. So they want it to be very easy. That's their plan. They want to be secure, but a lot of times it is that, hey, owner account or that root level account, because it's simple. That account goes in there and it's got the access so you can do everything with it. So these accounts and these roles and these policies are typically over provisioned to make things easy for the enterprises and the customers to implement these cloud infrastructures. That, John, I'm sure you see this constantly as you guys talk to this, people just going in blindly and just leveraging these roles.
Yeah, especially in the cloud, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes, you got to start somewhere, right, to figure out what it is you got to do. But that's exactly it, right? A lot of the roles that come out of the box, they're kind of powerful. So no one ever takes the time to, hey, let's maybe figure it out.
Yeah. What's there's always yin and yang. So what's on the opposite side? Under provisioned accounts. So it's that, hey, we've got this account and we've got it set up and we use this role that GCP or Azure or Amazon provided. My app's not working, or our portal's not working, or users can't do this, or administrators can't do that, or our DevSecOps Terraform can't do this. You never want to see this really, once you're operational, once you go live. Now, in theory, you have, test and prod and those types of things, dev test prod cycles, and you go through stuff. But that also means I've got to copy those roles up and give those access rights. So these types of things happen that really make people gun shy about these roles and make them gun shy about doing anything but the default roles. So it contributes to that sprawl, is because nobody wants to be down. They especially don't want to be down because you didn't get the right access.
I just had a knee-jerk reaction of anger looking at this slide right now, Rob. and I think that's why a lot of the folks we work with have a negative perception of security, because they're expecting this to happen. So another thing I like to caution, listeners about is anybody who's telling you they're going to automate role right sizing, please proceed with caution, because this will happen. This will happen.
Yeah, you definitely need to take a strong look at when you're setting roles up, especially if you're right sizing. If you're going into existing roles that are already functioning versus a new application or a new environment that you're spinning up, where you've got that time to do it, you want to be very, very careful, because again, it doesn't take long for customers to go, gee, I can't get to something. Let me swap over here to this other provider and this other company that I can go get this from, because we're all humans. We have these short time spans. If I can't go to, my local Lowe's and grab it right now, then I'm going to hop on Amazon and go order it. I'm going to hop on Google and go through Google Shopping and go order it. So you want to be very careful that you're not.
I'm logging in as admin. Let's just avoid all that.
Yes, very much so. This is one that a lot of people don't think about. This is one that, a lot of times, and this falls a little bit into what John was talking about with, there's multiple paths in for it. One of the paths in for this is every single one of these platforms, Google, Azure, Amazon, brings multiple APIs. There's APIs in there for administration, for creating new service accounts and creating new applications and creating new organizations and creating new users. There's, DevOps automation ones where I can go stop and start the services, and where I can provision new servers or new organizations, those types of things. There's APIs for identity federation, so I can bring my users in and get them provisioned in a just-in-time fashion. There's APIs for app to app. I've got this app and I've got another app that needs to talk to it, so I've got to set up, OAuth and OIDC and other things inside there so they can come in and get their tokens and get their access. Analytics. I want all my analytics to be able to reach into these applications, these services, and go pull the data, so I can go pull this relevant stuff out, so I can make sure we're getting our money's worth and our value out of these things, and the customers are satisfied and stuff. You think of Google, you think of Amazon. Advertising, of course, is very big inside those. There's APIs for advertising. So I've got all these APIs out there, and a lot of times they get overlooked with the the identities and the service accounts, and we're granting access to these APIs to go grant and do stuff. So it's really a challenge. And, John, I spent many years with some of the larger identity players in the market space. And I'll be honest, when I look at them and how they do it, they take a very generic approach. So, how does something like a cloud identity entitlement tool differentiate from, what some of the identity players are bringing to the market?
Yeah, that's a fair ask. So one of the things that I like to harp on, representing Britive, is nothing wrong with the way things were done before, but it was very human-centric. And almost everything it did, human-centric, credentials, vaults, the move to the cloud accelerated things dramatically. It's very machine-centric. I read a metric somewhere that says for every 1 human account in the cloud, there's 20, roughly, machine accounts. So for identity teams to adapt, they need to change their vernacular from thinking about old school audits in compliance in humans, right? To, well, how do service identities work? How do service accounts work? What are they trying to accomplish? It's kind of a fundamental shift, more down to the services and resource layer versus a very human-centric and role layer. So the cloud gives you those capabilities. You can touch just a resource. You don't need a group or a role, right? So it's that fundamental shift, I think, that we need to see a lot of identity folks, pivot towards where the cloud folks are already there. The identity folks can keep up.
Yeah, it's, I saw the stat the other day, and I've seen the stat a few times recently, but, and give it plus or minus a few percentage points, but right now, 70% of the traffic on the internet is not humans. It's APIs. It's applications talking to applications and getting data on behalf of users and on behalf of other applications to go populate things or make decisions or to go spin up new servers. And so, it's not the human interaction, it's the interaction of these applications and these services, on our behalf to go get information and data that's pushing that traffic. So it's, as much as, we're doing ordering on Amazon, or we're doing, our Facebook, or we're on ESPN, or we're on LinkedIn, or wherever we might happen to be, that's not the traffic. It's all the backside, underside traffic that's running through these APIs.
You know what I love about GCP too, Rob, is it's the land of AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So if you want to adapt to service identities and machines, GCP is the place, hands down.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got some of that richest environment. So that's why you'll see even more and more of these APIs in their environment than you see in some of the other ones. So it's something that you've got to focus on, make sure you're paying attention to, so that, you don't let that one slip through the cracks while you're busy focusing on those 2 or 3 high level things that we're so used to in the traditional identity world of thinking about. So, make sure that you're not forgetting about this, that you're realizing that, again, traditional IAM solution sets aren't necessarily going to be the best solution. They might provide some, high level air cover, some base level functionality, but they are not where the focus is at. And that's not their focus at this point in time. Their focus is on getting customers access and workforce members access to these things. The APIs and those types of things are secondary to them as they begin to bridge and shift that environment. So I'll just wrap up by saying, Stratascale, we've got a full suite of offerings inside our identity practice. One of those is working with partners like Britive on cloud identity entitlement management, but we also focus in the other areas, and we try and bring these things to light to organizations as they are looking at this, as they're looking at their strategies and roadmaps, as they're looking at their digital transformation and accelerating the move to the cloud. Traditional enterprises are still dealing with hybrid. As much as we talk cloud, they're still hybrid. So as organizations try and marry these together, this is where we bring our expertise and our resources and folks like myself to bear to come in and help organizations, get solutions like Britive in place and implemented and deployed. And then I'll pass it back over to you, John.
All right, thanks, Rob. So yeah, just to highlight too, Stratascale is great about this, right? And one of the things you've heard us, Rob and I mention, is bridging that gap really between IAM teams, security teams, and DevOps teams, cloud teams who are using GCP. These are some of the pain points that customers don't even know they have yet, but we like to solve together. Is in GCP, and no one's doing it facetiously in my mind, right? No one's doing it to lie or obfuscate, but it's a builder's playground where the folks that live there, they have absolute control over that ecosystem. They can tell security, yeah, all the humans are using MFA, great. But to our point, what about the service accounts? What are you doing for that? The other thing is there's no unified access, right? So those folks that live in a GCP land, I call them like the decacorn right now. I don't know too many Google Cloud Platform experts or even novices, to be fair. So, having a unified model of being able to access this multi-cloud ecosystem, it needs to be simplified. Visibility being the other. You can run reports, you can run different, feeds about data, but if you have no way to contextualize the data about what, the output of the report is telling you, that is very difficult for customers, right? So that's where, we leverage like Stratascale to work with us at Britive, where we can collect the data and help interpret it. The other thing is no one's moving away from traditional systems, even as much as, they're out there. You need to integrate. We need to integrate with things like SIM. Snowflake, we're built on Snowflake, one of our biggest partners. We integrate with them for data analytics, right? Same thing with IGA solutions. We integrate with those folks. ERP solutions. You need to integrate, right? Because GCP overall, as I pointed out, the IAM expertise there, I'm telling you, decacorn, you find one, send them my way, right? I would love to talk to them. You tell me, Rob, that you talk to a lot of folks too, not a lot of GCP experts out there.
No, there's not. GCP is maturing and they're stepping into the space. It's kind of right, wrong, or indifferent. It's kind of been the stepchild between the Amazon and Azures. Everybody kind of moved to those very rapidly, while Google solidified how they were going to approach these things and what they were going to push out and the service offerings they're going to have. But obviously Google has a major footprint and major capabilities, especially in the machine learning and the AI realms. That's been a lot of their focus inside that infrastructure. So they bring a lot to bear in there. But it's when you start talking to folks and you start talking to somebody and you say, hey, what do you think about the owner account in GCP? You're just as liable to get a blank look as you are anything else. So people just don't. They're still learning those concepts. It's kind of like I said. There's novices out there and they're trying to get their hands around it. Even if it's Amazon or it's Azure, they still don't quite think about them in the big picture realms and the big picture of identities in the realm of non-human identities, especially in the roles they play.
Yep, that's spot on, man. And what my key takeaway here is, I am a fan of the cloud. I will have a cloud tattooed on my back someday. I think it's the right way to go. And I'm not pointing these out for people to be afraid, but more to think about it and adopt. How can we improve like access control management?
Yeah, we definitely, the intent is for it to be successful, to be an enabler, not to be a roadblock, as John mentioned. We don't want to see that no access. We don't want to see that, hey, it took me 5 days to get this set up, so that's why we bypass security. And then, because we bypass security, our name's in the paper because we've got an open folder or an open S3 bucket, or we've got, somebody was able to use, somebody's static standing access to go get into something that they shouldn't have because somebody got phished. So that's never what we want. We want security to be an enabler. We want it to be able to help organizations rapidly meet their commitments to new products, new solution sets, new capabilities for their customers.
I like that term, accelerator. I want to accelerate GCP development while appeasing security.
Exactly.
That's where we find that balance. And I think Britive, obviously we have a way to take a look at your GCP world. We'll go ahead and take a snapshot of that for you. And reach out to us and we can chat about it. But I want to take just 10 minutes, right? I'm going to use the next 10 minutes to literally just show, right? Proof of concept of what we're talking about. Why, what problem do you solve and how do you solve it? So we just talked about what problem do you solve. We solved this GCP problem around access management, all those paths, all that visibility, this concept of temporary access is just in time. That's how we solve it. What problem do you solve? How do you solve it? Let's take a look at how we solve it. So Britive as a solution is a SaaS solution, 100% SaaS. No on-premise components. Everything we do is API driven. And that makes us very fast, very agile, very easy to use. We absolutely promote defense in depth. We absolutely promote integrations. What does that mean? If someone wants to use GCP, right? I'm logged in now. I'm not too concerned about how they authenticated. In this case, I'm using a service account and I'm authenticated. And one of the tasks I want to do is, I would like to manage resources. Maybe as part of my task in an interactive model, I'll highlight non-interactive. My goal is to do things in the development resource folder group and all its subsequent projects. Google does a good job of saying I don't have access. This is a good model. By default, this account, GCP dev, it doesn't have permissions. This is the right way that I like to do things.
Hey, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
You need to share your account, your screen, I mean.
Oh, wow. Good point. Man, I'm glad you're here, man. Let me go back. All right, because I just talked for like a minute. But the key is I have GCP up. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Cool. And here, within GCP, I'm logged in as a particular account. And this account, our goal, 0 standing privileges. I would like to do things in the development folder and all of its subsequent projects. Right? Remember that vernacular we learned early on? And that's the key, right? So the advantages of tools like Britive is the fact that, you know, we want to support defense in depth. So for a human user to log into our SaaS solution, you can authenticate through any method you choose, including Britive itself. We integrate with Okta, we integrate with Ping, we integrate with Azure. All of them do a great job around authentication, SSO. Right, so let me go ahead and log in here, because my goal is I want to manipulate my service account and, you know, make some changes to that development folder. So again, this is an interactive model. So with the interactive model, it's kind of slow and me clicking and
Good
inserting
security practice, MFA on it.
There you go. MFA is a best practice. And you can see here, now as a human user with access to Britive, here's where I'm authorized to elevate my permissions in different cloud services. One of those being AWS, Azure, GCP, OCI, Salesforce, ServiceNow. Within GCP, as I mentioned, I wanted to do something as the development folder administrator. This is what Britive calls a profile. It associates a specific role within GCP to a user within Britive, and we will elevate those permissions. So when I click on checkout, I am going to temporarily elevate the permissions of my existing account to be the administrator of the development folder for 59 minutes. So when we pivot back, right, that's what you'll see is that temporary elevation to owner of the development folder. Now I have the permissions to do whatever it is that I choose to do, propagating down across, you know, all the projects under development folder. Seems very trivial, seems very novel. It seems very easy, right? I can manipulate and do the things I want to do, but this is very powerful because at the end of 59 minutes, we are going to remove this access. On top of that, we know all the details about who initiated this access, where they did it from, and how they did it because they all exist in Britive. This is where we talked about that integration story with a SIM or with, you know, you saw something happen in Datadog. We know I checked out my access, I elevated my permissions. I was probably the one who manipulated the development folder as the administrator. I have the evidence in the audit log, right? That's not the end of the story though, right? What we want to do is be able to articulate explicitly some things like segregation of duty. This is where teams like Rob at Stratascale can help with those traditional ideas of, well, if you are a developer, you probably shouldn't have access to production environments, right? So you can see here, the access I'm allowed to elevate my permissions is limited to dev, right? And the permission I'm actually using is folder admin, right? And we know who's allowed to use those either by groups or by identities. Now, one unique thing I pivoted here before I round out this demo is this concept of a service identity. Britive can issue you a token, that whole story we talked about. And the token by default has no access, but the token is authorized to elevate its permissions to folder admin in the development world because it's on the list, Rob. So what does that look like? Let's open up the CLI. So in the CLI, we can show you. You can build out your Python scripts, your Ruby scripts, my favorite folks, you data scientists. And you can say, rather than embed those hard-coded credentials or overprivileged tokens, the token can come and check out the access it needs. I'm showing you again interactive. There is a non-interactive way, but as an interactive way via CLI, I'm showing exactly that. Create a temporary service principal that gives me the access to this development environment as the administrator. So here is the service account OAuth credentials I need to log in. Anything to add there, Rob?
Well, I want to call out a couple things. One, I know, and I love the fact that Britive has carried over the terminology that makes sense when people think about things like service accounts and checking them out and checking them in, temporary access, the logs, to be able to track back. So the ability to keep that concept similar for these folks, that's what they're used to when they're thinking about, hey, I used to go, like you mentioned, I used to go get the account for Oracle DBA, or I used to go get the account for this, and I went and checked it out, and I got the password, I logged in, and I took it away, or I rotated that password. So this is carrying those concepts forward to make things intuitive for folks and to fit well with what we've trained people to do for years. So it falls in that same realm. The other thing is the auditability and the tracking side of this, to be able to go down again, go back to those root cause analysis or those security incidents to go see what happened, to track these things in, and not go, hey, there's 13 service accounts, okay, which 12 people had that service count.
That's exactly it, right? And having that level of granularity around the enforcement, right? That really complements the visibility. I wanted to wrap up with visibility because every time I show this to folks, this is what I meant when I was talking about service accounts that perform unique actions. Imagine, and to Rob's point, you're trying to deconstruct an event, and this is all you have. 7581475, whatever, at cloud services, and you have no idea who owns this account, what this account does, what it has done, why is it even in this ecosystem, right? And that's at cloud services, yet you have the actual domain itself, britive-gdev.net. So managing visibility is one thing, right? That's great. And as I promised, let's take a look at my favorite permission of all, owner, right? Managing visibility into access is one thing, but managing this is something entirely different. There is like 1,000 different sets around what owner does. So anybody who's watching this, next time you give someone owner, look at this. I can keep scrolling literally for like minutes on the amount of power you give. So visibility combined with enforcement is the key. Temporary access can be a reality for service accounts and for human accounts, all bridged through Britive with that auditability and visibility and integration to the rest of the ecosystem for humans and non-humans. Very, very novel idea, but that's the key. All right, I feel like I've talked a whole lot. Rob, anything you want to say coming back over the top before we kind of wrap up here?
Well, I'm just curious, in a more encompassing sense, just for general edification for the audience is, something like Britive. How long does it take to implement a Britive solution into a Google environment?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So for Britive to be implemented, it takes us, the hardest part is normally internal change management for our customers.
Right.
Me to spin up a tenant, everything's SaaS-based. Everything is API-based. So it takes about an hour with your least sophisticated administrator to get me into GCP, right? There is a set of permissions I need. In the case of GCP, I do need a service account that gives me access, and you assign it the roles, and I can give you the visibility as well as the enforcement we just shown. Other clouds, very similar, less than an hour. We're in that ecosystem. You work with the team like Stratascale, less than a week. You have great visibility around what you're doing and a story about how to fix that. How do you turn visibility into action?
Awesome.
All right. The only other question I had here too was around service accounts. Is with service accounts, they fall into the same category. There's no reason a service account can't also have temporary access just in time. It's something we're very proud of too. So service accounts don't have to be treated any differently than humans. Again, via tokenized access, that's something we can, beat up on or revisit at some point. Let me see here. Any other questions? Anything you can think of, Rob?
Honestly, no. I great review, great overview of the capabilities, and wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Rob. And again, thanks everybody for listening in. John Morton and Rob Forbes with Stratascale, John Morton with Britive. And as mentioned, don't be afraid of the cloud. I love the cloud. Huge fan. It's just let's do things right, securely, and fast.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.